The boys on the steps of their new school in 1908 probably weren't thinking much about the 21st century, but their parents might have been pleased to know that 100 years later, the school they built was still the center of education in Linwood. To set the stage for the history of our beloved Belhaven, it might help to present a snapshot of the community which built what its first principal described as a handsome new building. In 1900, Linwood Borough was 11 years old, and it was basically two towns in one. The northern section was called Leedsville, after the Leeds family store on Shore Road near Maple Avenue. The southern end of town was called Seaview, so named, according to legend, because you could see the ocean from the back porch of Hegarty's store. The Shore Road had been a major north-south route since 1716. This photo is a rare view of the road through Linwood in 1903. Trolley tracks down the center were a critical transportation link for everyone. Skulls Bay and Patcon Creek, Linwood's eastern and western borders, were both early sites for shipbuilding. A bridge across Patcon Creek at Central Avenue created Linwood's first road for east-west travel. A bridge at Ocean Heights Avenue in 1819 ended shipbuilding on the creek, but created a second route for people traveling west. Churches on each of these busy roads were built by leaders of Linwood's maritime community. The Ocean Heights Church was even nicknamed the Old Mariners' Church. On the east, Skulls Bay was the site of a colonial shipyard, and an active baymen's industry continued there until the 1930s, when the oyster beds collapsed. From the earliest days, farming was as important as the maritime trades. Well into the 20th century, survival for many families depended on growing crops and raising farm animals. Larger farms, like the Dennis Farm and Crumb's Market Gardeners, were actually commercial enterprises. A look at Linwood at the dawn of the 20th century would show a town of around 500 people, with much of the land used for farms. Supplies were delivered to town by rail. By 1902, public utilities like gas, electric, water, telephone, and transportation services were in place or in the planning stages. It was a quiet, rural community with no police or fire department, 3 churches, a post office, and a few grocery stores scattered throughout town. There was a mayor and borough council, but day-to-day operations were conducted by a district clerk, whose duties included the Board of Education. There were 2 schools, numbered 19 and 20, when Linwood was part of Egg Harbor Township. They became Linwood Schools 1 and 2 when the borough was created in 1889. School number 1 was built in 1873 and referred to in borough records as the Linwood School. It was originally 1 room, but by 1900 it was divided in half with 2 teachers. Howard McConnell was principal from 1901 to 1907 and taught the upper grades, called the grammar grades. Miss Lizzie English began teaching in 1868 and came to Linwood in 1903. She stayed long enough to teach at Belhaven in its opening year. School number 2 was the Seaview School on Ocean Heights Avenue by the railroad tracks. School registers show that students here were from Linwood, Seaview, Summers Point, and Steelmanville. Staff turnover at Seaview was high, probably because most of the teachers here were male. In those days, many men left teaching for other careers after a short time. Zilpha Brandis was the only female teacher at Seaview in its last 20 years. She was a college graduate and a woman with a forceful personality. In 1906, she wrote to the board complaining about the lack of respect for her position.
I have heard several times that the principal of number 1 school claimed supervision of school number 2, of which I am teacher. The principal has never exercised any supervision, at least not over me. If he is supervising principal, the board may consider my position here vacant, as I will not teach under any supervisor whose qualifications are not superior to mine. Zilpha Brandis, October 9, 1906.
The following year, Roy Hunsberger replaced Zilpha. The response from Mr. Farish, when asked about finding a place to live, is another snapshot of life at the time.
Your letter of August 30th received. In answer would say, think you can get board for about $5 per week. One of our teachers boarded at Pleasantville and came down on trolley. The most direct way is by electric express from Philadelphia to Pleasantville. Change to Sure Fast line for Linwood. Fare from Philadelphia is $1. Fare to Linwood is 5 cents. James Farish, September 5th, 1907.
Farish was district clerk from 1889 to 1932, and he did much of his work from home. His meticulous records are filled with details about building Belhaven and problems they encountered along the way. He was in the perfect job for his abilities, temperament, and attention to detail, right on down to notifying himself of meeting dates. By 1905, school population was nearing 100, and the schools they went to were showing signs of age. There were around 60 children at school number 1.
The Board of Education is considering building a new brick schoolhouse. 2 rooms, location and other questions not yet fixed. James Farish, June 18th, 1906.
In September, the board declared that school accommodations were inadequate and unsuitable, and scheduled a public meeting for October 9th. Notices were posted in stores and at the post office. A one-story brick schoolhouse designed by architect Bertrand Ireland would be built on Asbury Avenue at a cost of $6,500. Voters turned down the project by a vote of 10 yes to 27 no. They may have been wondering why 66 students were going to use one room, while a second room sat empty for future use. The board continued to press for a new school. On January 15, 1907, a meeting was held for voters to approve a new plan, this time a 2-story school on Belhaven Avenue.
The question of building a new schoolhouse was defeated by a small majority. James Farish, January 21st, 1907.
Finally, on April 16, 1907, the Belhaven plan was accepted by a vote of 49 to 20. Now they could develop plans, advertise for bids, and choose a builder. They chose the firm of Lear and Corson the following April. Lear had recently built Mechanics Hall on Elm Avenue. The Belhaven plans contain many of the features of the Asbury Avenue design. The familiar background for generations of class photos came from those original blueprints and has been preserved through 4 renovation projects. There are no known photographs of the construction, but the work was completed in 5 months, and school opened its doors on September 14, 1908. A press article described classrooms with 3-foot wainscoting on the walls and stamped tin ceilings of exquisite design, painted blue. Pieces can still be found, if you know where to look. The staff for the opening year included all 3 teachers from the old schools and a janitor. Miss Lizzie English taught the primary grades, and Roy Hunsberger taught the intermediate grades 4, 5, and 6. Raleigh Weintraub, the last principal of school number 1, became Belhaven's first principal and taught grades 7 and 8. He had started teaching in Hamilton Township right after graduating high school. He came to Linwood in September 1907, a month before his 20th birthday. In an attempt to save money, the board changed plans for the toilet outbuildings from brick to wood. Then they decided to use the old outhouse from school number 1. Weintraub objected and urged Mr. Farish to convince the board that it would be unsuitable to move those scarred buildings near their handsome new school. Raleigh lost that round. The building committee ordered the old ones moved, then repaired and put in first-class condition, with 2 good coats of paint. A curiosity that has gone unnoticed by many over the years is the name Linwood High School over the entrance. That may have been the original plan, but as Principal Weintraub explained,
"We shall continue sending high school pupils to Atlantic City for a year or so until we can organize a high school system of our own. Then we will probably have a partial high school course of 2 or 3 years."
high school courses never were offered at Belhaven, and students went to high schools in other towns until 1961. One of the early problems at Belhaven was with the heater. Mr. Weintraub complained.
"It was so cold today in the rooms that it was almost impossible to do any work. All that is necessary is to have the method of operation explained to the janitor."
Letters from the following year showed that the heating problems continued.
The heat this morning in the primary has been only 59 degrees. Shall I keep the students at such a temperature? Edward Hazelton, November 17th, 1909.
A serious problem for the staff were irregular paydays.
"Please sign my check and have it countersigned by Mr. Skull and return it to me as soon as possible, as I have already entered it in my bank."
We will not get our salary today. Kindly let me know, as I am very badly in need of it. Edward Hazelton, December 17th, 1909. I assure you it is not a pleasant task to ask for our money every month, and hope you won't think I find any pleasure in it. Edward Hazelton, December 9, 1910.
After Belhaven opened, a debate began about what to do with the old schools. A vote in March left the issue unresolved, and discussion continued for another year. Women voters were allowed to participate for the first time, with restrictions. The decision to sell the Seaview School wasn't the problem. George Hegarty bought it for $325 in June 1910. The Leedsville School was the big issue. Some wanted to sell the building and keep the land. Others wanted it for a town hall. Finally, in March of 1910, a resolution passed to sell it to the borough for $1. After years of renting space at Dan Gray's Hotel, Mechanics Hall, and the Keystone Lodge, town government finally had a home. The old school was City Hall until 1965, just 8 years shy of its 100th birthday. Still in public use, it's listed on the National Register of Historic Places. In its second year, the school had a completely new staff. Without tenure laws, teachers reapplied annually. After 40 years of teaching, Lizzie English wasn't rehired, and Martilla Ketchum replaced her. Hunsberger was reappointed, but when he heard Weintraub was going to college, he applied for the principalship. The board had already appointed Warren Keene at $100 a month. But Keene resigned 3 weeks later, and the board appointed Hunsberger at $80 a month. He was respectful, but not pleased, and declined the job. Edward Hazelton accepted the $80 and became the school's second principal. With a full staff, school was now ready to open, they thought. In late August, Hunsberger resigned. Shortly after school opened, they hired Thomas Butler of Philadelphia. The staff was now complete and on site in time for the first school photograph ever taken on the iconic front steps. Details for the next decade are sketchy. Only 2 school pictures from the time have been found. In 1911, Hazelton left to work for the government, and Mr. Butler replaced him. School colors, purple and gold, were chosen during his first year. 6 years later, a letter in the press stated, "The forces which brought our schools so low have been removed." Townsend Scholl became principal in 1919. Salaries were raised, and teachers had to be normal school graduates. Zilpha Brandes Hoff raised an issue reminiscent of her earlier feelings.
At a salary of $1,800 for a 9-month term, we need a principal who is more than a normal graduate. One to whom the teacher can look for help and feel is her superior in work and ability. Mrs. Hoff, April 1920.
Interscholastic sports were organized before 1915. In 1920, Linwood defeated Northfield by a score of 58-11. The school year 1919-20 was the last year students were organized into 3 instructional groups. A 4th teacher the following year meant all 4 classrooms were used for the first time. Post-war development of the 20s brought big changes. Linwood's veterans came home ready to participate in a dramatic period of new growth. Advances in technology were going to make life better. New homes, sidewalks all the way down Shore Road, a fire department, and a new city hall were on the drawing board. In 1921, George L. Collins began his 25 years as Belhaven's principal. Highly respected and well loved, he brought long-term stability to the district. Art Risley, class of 26, remembered that Collins met them every morning on the front steps and clapped his hands in rhythm while they marched into the building. A headline in 1926 proclaimed Linwood soon to be village of pretty homes, gardens, as land development continues. Entry to the developed tracts is made past pretty gateways. During the 20s, population doubled, and class pictures from 1924 document the effect on the school. Voters were asked to consider acquiring land. The board even wanted to buy back the old schoolhouse.
Gentlemen, the district clerk was instructed to write you, asking you to sell Borough Hall and grounds to the Board of Education to be used as a primary school. James Farish, November 6, 1924.
A 1926 edition added 4 classrooms, and each grade now had its own room. But it wasn't enough to keep pace. The next year, a new school opened at Cresslea Park. The Great Depression halted all development. To save operating costs, Cresslea Park was closed in 1932 and students returned to Belhaven. That same year, the original wooden stairs at the front entrance were replaced with a new fireproof stairway in the middle of the building. This construction created space for a new dental and medical office downstairs and a principal's office upstairs. School activities during the Depression were a respite from the daily struggles. Musicals, directed by part-time music teacher Marion Bennett, were elaborate and very popular. A small stage in the 8th grade room was used for in-school programs, but graduations and musicals were held in the hall at Central Methodist Church. Graduation ceremonies during the period were apparently very formal. The graduates of the 30s were going to be tested as they became members of the greatest generation. World War II changed everything. Returning veterans soon learned nothing would be the same again. Free college education and new careers opened doors for everyone. Change began at Belhaven with the retirement of Mr. Collins in 1946. His replacement was Kenneth Frisbee, a history teacher from Pleasantville High School. Frisbee's attention to social activities quickly won the hearts of students. After-school dance lessons were very popular, and social activities were well attended. Community fundraising events were also popular, and teenagers enjoyed their own social club, the Linwood Youth Organization. All Wars Memorial Park was established in 1948, and Frisbee was the first president of the Recreation Board. The ballpark became a central focus of growing up in Linwood. In 1947, Mr. Frisbee restored the formal graduation ceremonies held at Central Hall that had been suspended during the war. In January 1949, the upper grades walked to the fire hall to see the inauguration of Harry Truman on a machine called television. For many, it was their first look at TV. Frank Adams, class 51, said it was a small display with a magnifying glass in front of it. He said the magnifier looked like a fish tank filled with water. Student memories give us a peek into the 50s.
Sunday, Monday, happy days. Tuesday, Wednesday, happy days.
In 1953, Floyd Malik and his friends carried knives to play mumbly peg in the schoolyard after lunch. Carol Duberson mentioned Miss Clayton's sneeze, and Dave Blood, class of 56, said you had to hear it to believe it. Roy Gilson's dog followed him to school, and janitor Ray Thorne kept him in the boiler room all day. From the class of 56, Bunny Hutton remembered the day Gail Schweinhart put a tack on Mr. Harmon's seat and got sent to the cloakroom. While there, she ate everybody's lunch. Cresslea Park School was reopened as a primary school in 1950. 4 years later, they added a kindergarten room and a library. The Brighton Farms on Shore Road was one of the first to be carved into lots, and the Gold Coast was born. It was apparent that opening in Cresslea wasn't going to meet classroom needs. In 1957, a new wing was added at Belhaven with offices and 4 new classrooms. The important addition was the school's first gym. No more graduations at Central Hall. Now there was a place at school for sports and social activities. An aerial view of the old Dennis farm visualized opportunities for development. It became a site for a high school and a corporate office. Mainland Regional High School opened in 1961, and Linwood's high school students finally had a permanent home. Prudential Insurance Company built an office on the grounds where lettuce had been grown for hotel salads. New jobs, new people, more homes, larger classes. Although Mr. Collins was called superintendent for a short time in the 20s, Lambert Reynolds became Linwood's first full-time superintendent of schools in 1959. A faculty of 14 teachers was pictured in the 1959 yearbook. The opening of new schools at Poplar Avenue and Seaview Avenue in 1961 basically made Belhaven a junior high. Linwood now had 4 schools, 2 of them with head teachers instead of principals. A stage set from a student production in 1969 speaks to the changing times. More changes occurred in the schools in this decade than at any other time period. Class photos from the period show continued growth, which by the end of the decade called for a 3rd school edition. School memories blend with those of earlier generations. Richard Stevens, class of 63, said he got an A for a gun rack made in wood shop, but he didn't even own a gun. Nancy Winnell, class 68, and her friends walked to Boucher's for penny candy and 5-cent popsicles, which she broke apart to share on the way back to basketball games. By the late 60s, elementary schools had become overcrowded, and adding a wing to Belhaven seemed the only answer. The 1971 edition included 9 regular classrooms, a new gym, the first media center, and classrooms for shop, home economics, and music. Student musicians had performed at graduations during the 1930s, and a district-wide school band held concerts in the 60s. The Patriots Band, organized by Ben Nutter in the early 70s, laid the foundation for a prize-winning instrumental program. Today's middle school band, directed by Larry Lampkin, has won numerous awards, including the Best Overall Concert Band in a Boston competition. In 1973, Lambert Reynolds retired and Francis Johnson was appointed as superintendent. After serving as head teacher for a time, Ralph Shiva was appointed principal in 1971. He became the longest reigning administrator in the school's history. Alumni from the 70s and 80s still complain about the dress code and the gym suits. Karen Rothman, 1972, claimed they invented short skirts and couldn't wait to get to mainland where they could wear jeans. 8th grade dances were a favorite. Boys sat on one side of the gym and girls sat on the other. Phyllis Augie, class 77, said the boys would start walking over, but when the DJ yelled "Ladies' Choice," they would all run back to their seats. Karen Tra, 1978, also remembered the dances where the boys smelled like mothballs. More than one graduate described a penalty for chewing gum in gym class. The entire school must have become basketball fans in 1976 when the boys' team, under Coach Kirby Knox, went undefeated. The Lady Falcons girls teams led by Coach Tom Coyle also built a great reputation and had a large following over the years. The athletic program has grown a great deal since the playground days of monster swing sets, mumbly peg, and recess. Basketball, volleyball, track, and field hockey have been interscholastic sports at Belhaven for some time. In 1981, students joined the celebration of Linwood's centennial with a huge birthday card at City Hall. When Ralph Shivo was appointed superintendent in 1986, Susan Evinsky became Belhaven's first woman principal. For some reason, photos from the 1980s are scarce, but memories have been shared. Kelly Edwards, Class 86, remembered the 8th grade trip to New York City and the World Trade Center. Heather Bard, Class 87, said they all had a great time at the food fight, but afterwards regretted the punishment, which meant missing the Belhaven Fair. By then, Cresslea School had closed because it could no longer meet state codes. Following Linwood's practice of recycling old buildings, it became the city library. 10 years later, the board closed Poplar Avenue School, leaving the district with only 2 buildings. The Seaview School was renovated for a second time, and in 2008, it was declared a National Blue Ribbon School. For the first time in over 20 years, some 8th grade classes of the 90s posed for class photos at graduation dances. For much of that time period, the only available pictures of life at Belhaven are from yearbooks. In 1995, the 4th renovation of Belhaven began. The project called for a new media center, a new gym, a cafetorium, and a new entrance on Wabash Avenue. The class of '97 could have worn t-shirts saying, "We survived the construction," but they chose the more formal pose of previous years. Classes from 1999 and 2000 closed out the 20th century with traditional class pictures at the end of the year. Since 1979, the academic think team has been one of Belhaven's popular activities. 14 local middle schools participate in an annual competition at Mainland Regional. Linwood has won 12 of the events over the 30-year period. Nancy Eachus, Carleen Heiser, and John Napoli have been advisors to the teams. Frank Rudnetsky became the 14th principal in 1999 and established a theme emphasizing scholarship and leadership. The vision statement says it all. The National Renaissance Program to recognize and reward academic excellence and good school citizenship is promoted on the walls throughout the building. Ralph Shivo retired in 2000 and Dr. Thomas Perufi became the new superintendent. Only 4 superintendents in 49 years must be some kind of record. Extracurricular activities of the 21st century include large-scale theater productions on their own new stage instead of at Mainland. Elaborate 8th grade dances, staged in the more accessible new gym at the Seaview School, have the atmosphere of old-time proms. The school website, maintained by webmaster Frank Polero, keeps parents and students informed about programs and events. A common thread throughout alumni letters has been enthusiastic tributes to teachers. Here's a quick look at a few of those from the available photographs in yearbooks and class pictures.
To that same old place that you laughed about. Well, the names have all changed since you hung around, but those dreams have remained and they've turned around. Who'd have thought they'd lead ya? Who'd have thought they'd lead ya? Here where we need ya. Here where we need ya. We tease him a lot, 'cause we got him on the spot. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Yeah, we tease him a lot.
Before the opening of school in September 2008, the staff met on the old front steps for a historic photograph. The ghosts of old hovered overhead. Some of them might be shocked at modern life, but none can doubt the results of Linwood schools. A quick walk through the halls from the oldest entrance to the newest one has something that will stir the memories of everyone who ever went to school here. Back to the Future surely is an appropriate theme for a school at the start of its 100th year, believing that the present and future are permanently bound to what came before. A press article in October 1909 declared the school a monument to the wisdom and foresight of the citizens of the borough that will remain a blessing to their children for generations to come. The decisions of subsequent school boards to retain the original facade is a continuing testament to that wisdom and foresight as we meet to celebrate the building's 100 years of service to the community and its children.